Hey everyone, Julian here and welcome back to another episode of the Learning Flask series. This is episode 6 and we're going to be taking a deeper look into the Jinja templating engine. Jinja is super powerful, especially when it comes to building web applications and websites, because we can do all sorts of cool stuff with it. In the last episode you learned about templates or base templates and how to inherit templates. In this episode, we're going to be exploring about how we actually work with objects in our templates. We can pass any Python object from our root into the template. We can manipulate it, we can work with it, we can do all sorts of cool stuff. So let's jump straight in. Here we are on the main screen. You can see we've got a terminal, we've got an editor, and we've got a browser open. And as always, I do have a text-based version of this guide. As you can see, it's pretty long. There's a fair amount of ground to cover. So let's get started. Let's head over to our local host, 127.0.0.1 5000, which is the Flask development server. Let's run our app. Flask run. And let's make sure we're up and running. And there we go. We are getting output in our terminal. We've got our silly about page and we've got our admin section. So let's head back. Right, what are we going to do? Let's create a new root. I'm going to call this root Jinja. Let's create our function, also called Jinja. And let's return, we're going to create a new template. So render template, and we're going to put it in the public directory. So public, let's call it jinja.html. Let's go ahead and create that template. Okay, so just like last time, we're going to extend our base template. So extends, and then we give it a full path to the template. So in our case, it's public templates and public template.html, as you can see there. So public templates, public template.html. We need a block title. Let's call this page Jinja. And of course we need to end the block with an end block tag. Let's create our main block called block main, funnily enough. Let's give ourselves some space and end block. Now let's throw in some CSS classes in our divs. So we're using Bootstrap, so container, row, col, and let's give ourselves an H1 heading of Jinja templates, and let's throw in a horizontal rule and give ourselves some more space here. So save that, head back into your browser and head to /Jinja, and there we go, we get our template. Let's quickly jump into our public template and add a link to this in our nav. So I'm just going to change these both to Jinja, save and refresh, and there we go. We get a nice nav icon so we can quickly get to our Jinja page. So what do we need to do? Well, like I said, we can pass any object we want, any Python object we can pass from our root into our template. So let's go ahead. And I'm going to create a variable called my name. Feel free to change that for your own. Unless your name is Julian, then hey, you must be pretty cool. My name equals my name. Okay, so what have we done here? We've created a variable or an object. It can be absolutely anything, which we will be doing shortly. And then we pass it as a key value pair into the render template function. So we've got a comma there after our template name, and then it just takes any arguments or keyword arguments here. So my name equals my name. Now that means our template, jinja.html, has full access to this object, which is pretty awesome. So back in our template, how do we access this? Well, let's break our template up so we can see what we're doing. So variables, I'm just going to put an H4 and a horizontal row and a p tag, and inside that p tag I want to access our variable, and we do so with this syntax. So we use the double curly braces, and then I'm going to go ahead and put the variable I want to embed inside these p tags. So let's see how that looks. And there we go. We get the value for our variable embedded right there into our HTML. And if we inspect that element, I don't know if you guys can see this, but we've got a p tag with the word Julian inside. So that is how you access variable values in a template. Let's go ahead and just put, sorry, my screen's about to turn off, name and a colon, just so we know what we're doing. There we go, name Julian. Perfect. So like I said, we can create and pass any Python object into our template. So let's go ahead and create some more. We're going to create all sorts. So let's just throw in an integer. Let's create a list. I'm going to call it langs, and we'll just put some programming languages in there. Joe, capitalized, Java, script, bash, C, and let's do one more. Let's put Ruby in there. Let's create a dictionary. I'm going to call it friends. And I'm going to put some names and ages in there. Amy, she can be 60, of course, my 60-year-old friend Amy. Tony, let's capitalize that T. Tony is 56 and Clarissa is 23. So we've got a dictionary. Let's go ahead and create a tuple. So let's call this, I don't know, colors equals red, green, that will do. Let's create a quick class. I'm going to call this get remote. Let's create an init function. Going to take self, it's going to take a name, a description and a URL, and let's set those. So self.name equals name, self.description equals description, and self.url equals URL. It's annoying that you have to click enter twice with VS Code. Okay, let's create a class method. So def, we're just going to call it pull. It's going to take self, and that's just going to say return. Let's give a snazzy f string. Pulling repo, just do self.name, and we'll create another one just for lols. Clone, and that's going to take a self again, and return an f string of cloning into, let's just do .self.url. Okay, that looks fine. Let's create a function. So we can actually pass a function into a Jinja template, which is really cool. Def, I'm going to call it repeat, which is going to take string, we're just going to call it x for now, and a quantity, and we'll go ahead and return x times quantity. Perfect. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything for now. Maybe we'll add another variable called cool, and we'll give it a Boolean. So let's go ahead and save that. Now let's pass them all into our template. So let's give ourselves some space here. We'll do 3 pairs per line. So we've got age equals age. We've got langs equals langs. We've got friends. We've got colors. And yes, that is the English spelling of colors. Cool equals cool. Let's pass our actual class in. Not an instance of a class, but the actual class itself. And repeat equals repeat. Okay, I think we're looking good. Let's save that, and then let's just refresh. That's fine. In fact, I think what I want to do is create an instance of the get remote class. So I'm just going to call this my remote equals get remote. and we'll just give it some quick values. I'm just going to call this Flask Jinja. Description equals template design tutorial, and URL, let's just make something up. Okay, that will do. So we've got our instance of the class and we've got the class itself, and let's pass them both in. So my remote equals my remote. So that's these are all kind of just default Python objects that we've created. If you've got sort of database objects, you can pass them into the templates as well, which is very useful, which we'll cover at some point. So let's go ahead and do something with our objects that we've passed in. So back in Jinja.html, the first thing I want to do, and one of the things that I find myself using the most in Jinja, is looping. So let's go ahead and just copy this down. So we got a new heading, looping. Right, so how do we loop? How do we iterate through an iterable? Well, we use the following syntax. For the variable, so in this case we're going to loop through our list of languages, so I'll just say for lang in langs, and now every for loop you must explicitly close with end for. So for variable in iterable, and then we'll do something with the variable, and then we must close the for loop with the end for tag, and just pay attention to the syntax there. It is different from these double curly braces. We've got a single curly brace and a % symbol. So now, how do we access our variable inside the loop? Well, we use the double curly brace syntax, so lang. But rather than do that, what I want to do is something a little different. So I'm just going to delete that. I'm going to go ahead and cut that whole group. I'm going to create an unordered list in our HTML. I'm going to paste that in. Let me just sort this formatting out here. And inside our for loop, I want to create a load of list elements. Why have I got that capitalized? So list, and then I want to dump our lang variable inside of this list. So let's go ahead and save and refresh. And there we go. So we're looping through our list, and we are embedding each element in that list inside an li tag. I don't know if you can see it in the developer tools there, but we've got 5 list elements there embedded in our HTML, which is very, very nice. So another cool thing we can do with the loops is access the loop index. So similar to the enumerate function in Python, we use a slightly different syntax in Jinja. So looping with index, we access the index with a special Jinja variable called the loop index. So let's go ahead and save that. So you can see what we've done there. We've just got loop index wrapped in these double curly braces. I put colon there, and then the variable that we want to embed. And there we go. We get a nice indexed list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then our variables are right next to it. Now you'll notice that the index starts with 1, and that's just a function of the loop.index. But if we put loop.index0, save that, reload, and there we go. Our index is starting at 0. So that's looping through a list, and we do the exact same thing with any other iterable. So let's loop through a dictionary. So looping a dict, what do? Well, we use the same for in syntax, but let's change it slightly. Let's do for key and value in our dictionary, which is called friends. And of course, if we want to access the key and value, we need the .items method on the dictionary. Let's go ahead and delete inside our list. We'll do the double curly braces, we'll put in our key, we'll put a colon, and then we'll access the value of that key with the v. So let's go ahead and save that, refresh, and there we go. We're looping through a dictionary, accessing the key, and the value with KV. And that's because we're using the .items method on the dictionary. Of course, if we say copy and paste that, looping a dict keys, we can change that to keys. Let's delete the V because we're only pulling one variable out of it. And then I'll go ahead and delete that. So we've just got the, no, let's change that to a K. So we're just looping through the keys. We go ahead and reload, and there we go, we're looping through the dictionary's keys. And of course, you can do the same with values and so on and so forth. So that's looping through a dictionary. Another thing I want to show you is accessing the members of an iterable. So let's say access list member. Oh my goodness. Sorry guys, cannot type today. So I'm just going to add a p tag. I'm going to add the double curly braces, and let's access langs at index 0. And then if we go and reload that, you can see we've accessed the 0th element of that list. And of course we can do the exact same with a dictionary. Access dict member. I'm going to change that to friends, and inside the square brackets, let's just put Tom because I knew he would be in our dictionary. And there we go, we get the value for the Tom key of our dictionary. And we can do the same with our classes. So we can access class attributes by doing exactly what we would do in Python. I think it was called my, let me double check, my remote dot name. And if we go and reload, and there we go, Flask Jinja, that was the name attribute of our class. Right, so what else do I want to show you? Let's unpack some variables. So we had a tuple which was passed into our template. So unpack variables. Now this is quite interesting. We can actually set new variables in our templates, and we do that with the following syntax. Again, the curly percentage braces. We need a name for these. You guys got any ideas? Put them in the comments below. So we use the keyword set followed by the variable we want to set. So let's do just A and B. It doesn't really matter. We're just going to unpack our tuple, which I believe was called colors. Now we have full access to the A and B variable throughout our template, which is nice. So let's go ahead and throw a couple of p tags, and I'm just going to put A and B. Let's see what happens. And there we go, we've unpacked the variables from the tuple that we passed into the template. We've reassigned them as new variables, and then we're able to access those variables using the double curly brace syntax with the variable in between. What else can we do with Jinja? Well, we can do loads more things. We can call a function. So let's call our repeat function. Let's stick it in between a couple of p tags and repeat. It took a string, so let's just put Flask is awesome, add a space, and it also took a value, so let's just put 10. Go ahead and save, reload the page, and there we go. So if we take a quick look at our function again, repeat, it took a string and a quantity, and then we're multiplying them together, and that is returning the value, which is then being embedded into our source code inside this p tag. So there we go, as you can see. Sorry, I've got some messages going off, but there we go. You can see that has called the function, returned the value, which is then embedded into our template, which is very nice. So let's do a bit of work with our class. So we can call a class method from our template. So call a class method So our class was called getRemote. No, our class was called myRemote. So let's go and myRemote, and we'll call a class method of pull. Now let's do clone. And again, we've got that wrapped in p tag. So whatever the return of that class method is going to be embedded into our HTML. So there we go. We got cloning into, which was the class method for that class instance. So we've called functions, we've done some work with classes, we've accessed the members of a dictionary and a list. We've assigned values using the set syntax, and then we're able to access all of these variables throughout our template. One thing to note though, I believe when you use set inside of a loop, you're unable to access the whatever variable you set outside of that block. So it's just something to bear in mind. So let's move on to some conditional stuff. So just like in Python, you have full access to all of the conditional operators within your Jinja template. So conditionals, let's do some work on this. Oh, my leg's going dead. So let's loop, no, let's not loop, let's work with our Boolean that we passed in. So if cool, end if. So just like a normal if statement in Python, we use the if keyword followed by whatever we want to do, and then we end that statement with the end if syntax. So just like with a for loop, you open it and you have to explicitly close it. So if cool, let's do something, let's just add a p tag, and let's just put you are followed by, well, that's just going to print you are true. So let's just put cool is, and then let's access the cool variable and see what we get. Should be cool is true. There we go, cool is true. And we can do if not, just like we can in Python. And there we go, we don't get any result because it hasn't passed that check. What else can we do? We can do comparisons. So we've got full access to all of the comparison operators in our Jinja templates. So let's do another if statement. So if age is less than, let's say 18, and let's go ahead and close off this if statement. So just like in Python, we have access to if, we have access to elif, we have access to else, but we always have to make sure that we close off that with an end if statement. So let's go ahead and put a p tag, and no, in fact, we don't need to put a variable in there. Let's just say no entry. Let's add an elif age is less than 26. Let's just put nearly old enough. And then after that, let's throw in an else statement and say p, you may enter, and then of course we're closing off that block with an end if. So let's go ahead and save that, refresh, and there we go, we get you may enter because of course our age is set to 30, but if we go ahead and put 17, refresh, no entry. If we go ahead and change that to 27, you may enter, yeah, of course, because we set that as 26. All right, okay. So if you get the point, we get access to all of the comparison operators within our template. So I mean, equal to, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, not equal to. So full access to the comparison operators in Jinja, which I use all the time. Another thing I'm not going to cover in this one, but you have access to the logic operators, so and, or, and not, and you've seen an example of not here. So yeah, you get access to and, or, and not, which is useful. We can do math. I've never really found the use to use much math in templates, but for completeness, it is there. So we can just put P, and that's age divided by 2. And there we go, we get a result in our template. So the next thing I want to show you, what I want to show you is probably more exciting, which is template filters. Let's go ahead and add a new section. Now, template filters in Jinja are really powerful. They're kind of like functions where they take arguments and they return a value. Some of them are pretty similar to the standard Python functions. Some of them are unique to Jinja. So Jinja does come with a quite a big range of standard built-in filters, and I'll put a link in the description to the Jinja doc so you can have a read through. And I definitely recommend you do, because reading through the docs you see actually there's some really useful functions to use in your templates that come out of the box with Jinja. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples in this scenario. So let's add a new P tag, and inside here I want to pass our langs list, and to use a filter we use the pipe symbol and then followed by the filter name. So one of the built-in filters is the length filter, so let's go ahead and save that and then refresh, and there we get the length of the object that we pass to the langs filter, not langs, to the length filter. In this case it's 5. So another, we could change that for colors, which should give us 2. As you can see, that gives us 2. And we've got a dictionary as well that was called friends. Let's go ahead and refresh to see that take effect, and there we go. So the length filter will just return the length of an object that you pass to it, and you use filters by providing the object followed by a pipe and then the actual name of the filter itself. So let's add another one below it. My name I'm going to pass to the reverse filter, and then if we come down here we can see our name has been reversed. What else do we have? Yeah, like I said, there's so many filters in Jinja. You should definitely go ahead and look through because they are super useful. So we can do my name upper. Don't know what happened there. Let's just drop the arrow off. And we can do upper. I believe we can do capitalize. I think. I'm not sure. It might not be. No, that's not. Okay, I'm just going to delete that one for now. But like I said, there's absolutely tons of filters. You can see we've got an uppercase one and we've got our reverse one. So go ahead and check out the docs for some of those. Another filter I use quite often is the join filter. So I'm just going to copy this, bring it down, join, let's delete these two. So we know that we've got a list called langs, and I'm going to pass that to join, and then join is going to take an argument of the whatever we want to use to join the list together. So in that case I'm just using a comma followed by a space, and if we refresh that we can see that's joined our list together. And I use join all of the time in Jinja templates, especially if you've got list objects stored in databases, or you've got a list in your view, you want to pass it in. If you don't join them and you just print a list or embed a list into your HTML, it's going to look like that. So the odds are you probably don't want your users just seeing all this weird syntax in the page. So again, we just pass that to join, and then you add the separator here. So we can add whatever we want. So let's just add a little tilde there, and there we go. That's joined them together with whatever we specify. So the next thing I want to cover is custom filters. And again, this is something I use in Flask and Jinja all the time. So let's create a new heading. Custom filters. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. So what is a custom filter? Well, it's essentially a filter just like this, and it's used in the exact same way. It's just we create it ourselves. You know, join, upper, reverse, and length, and loads more are just standard filters that come with Jinja. But, you know, it gives us the option to create our own, which is really nice. And we do that in our Flask app. So you can either create a new file called something like filters.py and then import that into your init. I'm not going to do that in this example. I'm just going to stick it in the top of our views file. So how do we add it? App dot. Let me check my notes here. Yep, template filter. App.template filter. And then we give it a name. So I'm just going to call this one clean date because we're going to be working with a datetime object. So that is the name of the filter that we call from within our template. So then it's just a function, and it's going to take an object. In our case, it's a datetime object, and we're going to return a nicely formatted string of the date that gets passed to the function. So first things first, I want to import datetime from the datetime library. And then what I'm going to do is return dt.strf_time, so string format time, and I'm going to give that %d for the day of the week, followed by %m, I believe, no, %b, and %uppercase y. Go ahead and click save. So this is going to register a new template on our app, and we can use this filter it's not going to register a new template, it's going to register a new template filter on our app, and we'll be able to use this filter from any template within our app, which is really convenient and really nice. So next thing, we need to create a datetime object, so I'm just going to create that here below our function. I'm just going to call it date equals datetime.utc now, and then we need to pass that into our template. Date equals date. Now if we come back to our Jinja HTML file, if we were to just put date in here to embed the value, go ahead and, oops, I made a mistake. From datetime, import datetime. That was a silly mistake. There we go. Sometimes I find it hard to think and type straight at the same time. So there we go. We can see our datetime object down there in all its raw, naked glory. But now if we go ahead and apply our custom filter to our date object, clean date, go ahead and save and refresh. And you can see that is returning us a nicely formatted date. So this is really useful if you're working with, you know, let's say a blog post or a news article, for example, and in your database you're just saving the date it was created or the date published as a datetime object. You can just pass the whole object in and then run a custom filter on to return yourself a nicely formatted date. So next up, sorry, I've got my computer's making noises here. Next up, I want to show you guys about escaping. Now, escaping in Jinja, what is it? So by default, when you pass any HTML or strings, in fact, to a template through the render template function, Jinja is going to do some sanitizing of that string. And the reason it does that is because, you know, you could have some kind of malicious code in that string, and then when you go and dump it into your HTML, the browser's going to see it, the browser's going to execute it, and you're going to find yourself in a whole lot of trouble. I'm sure you've probably heard of cross-site scripting and various other malicious techniques that people use to do bad things to your website, which is not something you want. So by default, Jinja in Flask is going to escape those strings, and it's going to try its best to replace any, well, not any, but certain characters with safe characters. So let's do an example of this. In our views, what I want to do is just go ahead and create a new string. And I'm going to call it my HTML. And it's just going to be something fairly simple, just an H1, close that H1 tag. And this is some HTML. Now, if we pass that in, my HTML equals my HTML. And then if we access that in our Jinja template, let's see what happens. Go ahead and refresh. And there we go. It's just been inserted as a sort of string, but not an HTML string. So if we go ahead and inspect that, and if we come down, you can see here it's inside these two quotation marks. So it's been escaped, which is, you know, in some cases the exact thing that we want, especially if you're taking any kind of user input, which you're then going to render into a page. You know, that you don't want them cross-site scripting you or inserting any strings that the browser's then going to execute and do nasty things with. So what happens if we do want to embed that string into our HTML? Well, we can add the safe filter. So what we're going to do is pipe my HTML through the safe filter, and let's see what happens. So there we go. We've got an actual H1 element embedded now into our page, which in a lot of cases you need to have. You know, if you're working on a content management system or you want HTML to be embedded into your page, that is how you do it. But you know, you must be extremely careful. You don't want to be using the safe escape on any sort of random input coming in from untrusted sources, because it will land you in a whole heap of trouble. For example, let's create a script tag in our view and pass it into our template. So let's call it suspicious equals script. I'm going to close that script tag, and inside here we'll put an alert, and then you got hacked. Save that. Suspicious equals suspicious, and then let's go and drop that into our HTML. Suspicious. And what happens now if we pipe a script tag through safe? Well, there we go. So that JavaScript is now being executed in the browser, and the browser's just going to do whatever it pleases, you know, whether that's to render some random script from the other side of the world. Your browser is going to see that script tag and it's going to execute it. As you can see down here in the developer tools, we've got a script tag just plain embedded into our HTML, and the browser's running that script. So that is why you need to pay a lot of attention if you're using the safe filter. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that now, because I don't want that annoying alert to keep popping up. So the next thing I want to cover are macros. Now, macros in Jinja are extremely cool. So let's create a new heading. So what's a macro? So a macro in Jinja is a little bit like a function, where you declare some kind of element that you can then reuse and pass different arguments to. So let's go ahead and create a macro. So first of all, let's look at the syntax for creating a macro. So again, we use our sets of double brace and percent and end macro, and to open it, it's macro. But there's a bit of a variation here. So with macros, you actually need to add this little dash just before the closing set of curly braces and percent signs in the opening, and in the closing you do the same, you just add it on the other side. So this is the syntax for creating a macro. And now we want to give our macro a name. So I'm just, macro name, and then a set of parentheses, and then you can just provide keyword arguments inside these parentheses. So very similar to a function, it's just use the macro syntax to open it and the end macro syntax to close it, and you must remember to use these little dashes. So then inside we create our sort of template for the macro, and then we pass it arguments, and then we can reuse it throughout. So I want to create a macro here for a input. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and I'm going to rename this macro as input, and it's going to take several arguments, label, and again you can leave arguments as empty strings. You can put named arguments just like in a Python function. So I'm going to leave the label empty, and for type I'm going to put text, and for name I'm going to leave that empty, and for ID I'm going to leave that empty, and for placeholder I'm also going to add that in and leave that empty. Now of course you don't need to add these, you can add absolutely anything you want, and it will make more sense when we actually write the contents of our macro in just a sec. So what are we going to do? I'm going to have I want this macro to essentially repeat a form input for me. So form input, and this is just the bootstrap classes that we're using here for the CSS. So it's not form input, sorry, it's form group, and then inside here we have a label. I'm just going to delete that for. And now this is where we can actually start to access some of the arguments passed in from the macro inside our macro. So here I want to use the label, and then we've got an input, and the type I'm going to change that because I want whatever someone passes in to our input macro as type, I want that to then be placed in here inside of our macro. So type name equals name, ID equals ID, and placeholder equals placeholder equals our placeholder. So let's just quickly recap what we've done here. We've created a macro, which is like a reusable function within our template. We've given it a name. In this case, we've just called it input. And then we give it a set of arguments that we can provide. We can leave defaults, we can leave them empty. So this is a really flexible way of writing reusable code within your template. So how do we use it? Double curly braces when we want to use a macro, and then we just give it the macro name and any arguments that we want to provide to it. So input, I'm going to give it a label of your name, it really doesn't matter. The type is text, so that's fine, we don't need to provide that argument. Name, I'm going to provide name, and ID, I'm going to provide name, and placeholder, I'm going to provide please enter your name. So there we go. We've created a macro, and now we're actually using the macro. So let's go ahead and see how that looks in our HTML. Okay, so we've got the input. Maybe I've made a mistake there. Oh yeah, I think the bootstrap inputs need a class of, let me double check here. Yeah, it's the form control. If you are following along and using bootstrap, you need to make sure you add the class of form control. So now we refresh that, there we go. We get a nice label, which was an argument that we provided, and then we get our nice input element, and we can keep reusing this over and over again. So let me make that a little bigger. I'll copy this down a few times. So let's switch up some of these arguments. So let's do one for age. That's going to be a type of number. And we can change the name attribute and the ID attribute. Please enter your age, and then let's do a password. Password name equals password. Let's just copy that. Please enter a password, and of course I want the type to also be password. So the brown password, there we go. So let's check it out. So there we go, we've got 3 form elements. We've got one which is the type of number, and there you can see we get the nice little selector there, and we've got a password input which is going to hide our input. So that is how you create macros in a Jinja template. So really nice, really convenient. You know, the amount of code here compared to, you know, having all this. And I find this quite easy to work with, especially if you're used to working with Python, you don't work with too much HTML and CSS, then maybe doing it this way is a bit more logical for you. So the next thing I want to do is, throughout this series, we've been kind of breaking our application structure up into subdirectories just to make things a little bit more readable. I want to go ahead and create a macros directory and a macros file. A cool thing that you can do with Jinja, which is something I just find amazing, is you can create a file, an HTML file, you can put a load of macros in it, and then you can actually import those macros into your templates, which for me is just crazy. So what I want to do is go and create a macros directory and a macros HTML file. So I'm going to do that in, how do I want to do this? So I'm just going to create it inside of our templates directory. So I'm going to create a macros directory here and a new file called input macros.html. So these macros will be available to the admin and the public routes, which is exactly what I want. So let's go ahead and cut our macro and save. And I'm just going to drop that in here. Let's format that. So I'm just going to drop that into our input macros file. So the next thing to do if we want to access this macro is import it. How do we do that? So just like in Python, at the top of our template, we use the curly brace % syntax. And then what we do is we do the following: import, and then we need to give it a path to the file name where our macros are. So in our case, ours is in the macros directory, and we called it input macros.html, and we're going to import that as im. So just like in Python, import x as x. So that's exactly what we've done. So now we've got access to all of the macros in our input macros.html file, which is super cool. So let's go ahead and use that. So because we've imported it as im, we need to prepend any of our macros with im. So let's go ahead and do that. im.input. So there we go. Let me just make this a little smaller. And then if we come back to our template, you can see there we've still got all of our templates, but we're actually importing them from another file, which I just find mind-blowing. I think that's so cool. So a nice little pattern, you know, you could go and set up a load of different macros files, or split out these directories into different sections, you know, for code that you're going to be reusing throughout your application. It's super useful. So that's a really nice feature of Jinja. And that pretty much wraps things up for this episode. So let's just run down these and recap. So for loops, or looping through any kind of iterable, you use the same syntax as Python. For x in x, just make sure you close it off with the end for tag. Accessing members of lists, dictionaries, or attributes of classes, use the exact same syntax. We've got the actual element itself wrapped in a set of curly braces, double curly braces, and then we're accessing the members using, for a list we're using 0. For a dictionary we're accessing it via the key and just providing the key in there. And an attribute, we use the dot notation, so dot name or dot whatever attribute you want to access. We can unpack and we can set new variables. So, in this example, we've unpacked a tuple and we've reassigned the values of that tuple to A and B, which we can then access throughout our template. We can call functions. We can call class methods, just like we would in Python. It's so cool. We can use conditionals. So in here, we're just testing a Boolean value with the not operator, and we've got access to the full list of comparison operators in Jinja, just like we would in Python. We can do math. We can then access the awesome range of standard template filters that come with Jinja. Again, links in the docs. I highly recommend go and check out the documentation for this because there's so many cool filters. The ones I've shown here are the kind of basic ones, but you can do all sorts of like mappings and everything. It's really cool. The join filter, which I use all the time, which is very handy. We can create custom filters. So again, we use the same syntax to access the custom filter. And to create a custom filter, we use the app.templateFilter syntax. We pass it the name of the filter. We then create a function underneath, and then we pass the object to our function. Now, I've just done a simple return here and returned the datetime object that we're passing in as a sort of nicely formatted string, but you can do absolutely anything inside this function. So really, really cool. Escaping. So we looked at escaping, and I hope I drilled home how important it was to be careful around escaping. If you don't escape some HTML, it's just going to dump it into your template as a escaped string. But if you do want to embed any HTML or JavaScript into your HTML document itself, you have to use the safe filter. And then lastly we covered macros. So again, creating a macro, use the following syntax. So we've got our curly brace %, followed by the macro keyword, followed by the name of the macro you want to create. So just like a function. So rather than def, we're using macro. And then we've got parentheses here with any arguments that we want to provide to our template. And then we use those, macro. And then we use those values inside our macro, just using the same syntax that we've used throughout the template, which is the set of double curly braces. And then we can drop those in throughout our macro. And then, of course, we've created a separate file for our macros, and then we import them into our templates using the import and then the name of the file, or the path to the file anyway. In our case, as you learned from a couple of episodes ago, Flask is going to start looking from the default templates directory, or the default is the templates directory, I should say. So it's going to start here. So whatever path you give it, just make sure it's from the root of the templates directory. So in our case, we've got templates, macros, input macros. So in here, we've just put macros and input macros. So we've imported that as im, and then we're using our template filters with the im dot whatever the name of your macro. So in our case, it's input. So that pretty much wraps things up for Jinja templating. There's so much more in Jinja to explore, so make sure you go and look at the documentation, experiment, play around, have some fun with Jinja, and I will see you in the next one. So in the next episode, we're going to be covering forms. We're going to create some forms. We're going to post some form data, some views. We're going to create some new views. We're going to handle that form data, and we're going to give some feedback to our users. So I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to subscribe, comment below if you've got any questions, or if I made an absolute balls up of something. Be sure to let me know, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers, guys.